The conference room fell silent as I watched Marcus Wellington slide my nameplate off the mahogany table and replace it with his nephew's. 3 minutes. That's all the time between me losing the biggest deal of my career and discovering the most devastating secret of my life. But Marcus had no idea that the company he was about to sell for $1.5 billion, I secretly owned 40% of it. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The morning started like any other Tuesday in downtown Chicago. I arrived at Wellington Industries at 6:30 a.m., 2 hours before most employees, clutching my third espresso and mentally rehearsing every detail of the merger presentation. After 18 months of negotiations, today was the day Hartman Corporation would officially acquire us for $1.5 billion. I had built this deal from nothing. Every PowerPoint slide, every financial projection, every legal clause bore my fingerprints. The boardroom on the 42nd floor had become my second home, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of Lake Michigan that I'd memorized during countless late-night strategy sessions. My assistant Rebecca knocked on my office door, her usually composed demeanor slightly frazzled. "Elena, Mr. Wellington wants to see you in his office immediately." Marcus Wellington had been my mentor for 7 years. When I joined Wellington Industries fresh out of Northwestern's MBA program, he saw something in me that others missed. While my classmates landed at Goldman Sachs and McKinsey, I chose this mid-sized manufacturing company because Marcus promised me real responsibility, real impact. He delivered. By 28, I was vice president of strategic development. By 31, I was leading merger discussions that would transform Wellington Industries into a major player in the industrial automation space. The Hartman deal wasn't just another acquisition, it was my masterpiece. I knocked on Marcus's office door expecting our usual pre-meeting briefing. Instead, I found him pacing behind his desk, his silver hair disheveled, his typically pristine suit wrinkled. "Elena, sit down. We need to talk." Something in his tone made my stomach drop. Marcus had always been direct, but this felt different. "Colder. The Hartman meeting today, there's been a change of plans." I leaned forward, my mind racing through potential complications. What kind of change? Did they want to modify the terms? The price point? Marcus couldn't meet my eyes. "You won't be leading the presentation." The words hit me like a physical blow. "I'm sorry, what?" "Trevor will be taking over from here." Trevor. Marcus's nephew. 26 years old, Harvard MBA, 2 years at Wellington Industries spent mostly playing golf with clients and taking credit for other people's work. Trevor, who couldn't explain our core business model without consulting his notes. Marcus, this has to be a joke. I've lived and breathed this deal for 18 months. I know every number, every projection, every potential objection Hartman might raise. Trevor doesn't even understand our manufacturing processes. Marcus finally looked at me, and I saw something I'd never seen in his eyes before. Guilt mixed with resignation. "The decision has been made, Elena. Trevor will represent Wellington Industries in all future dealings with Hartman Corporation." Stood up so quickly my chair rolled backward and hit the wall. "This is insane. You know I'm the only person who can pull this off. Hartman specifically requested to work with me after our initial presentations. Sarah Chen from their board told you personally that my strategic vision was what sold them on this merger. Things change in business, Elena. You know that." "What things? What possibly could have changed between yesterday and today?" Marcus walked to his window, staring out at the Chicago skyline. For a moment, I thought he might explain, might give me some rational justification for destroying everything I'd worked toward. Instead, he said, "Clean out your office. Security will escort you out within the hour." The room tilted. "You're firing." "Me?" "Your employment with Wellington Industries is terminated, effective immediately." I felt like I was drowning in broad daylight. "Marcus, after everything we've built together, After 7 years of 60-hour weeks and sleeping in this office during crunch periods, you're throwing me away 3 minutes before the biggest deal. In company history? He turned back to face me, and for a split second, I saw the man who had mentored me, who had believed in me when no one else would. Then his expression hardened again. This conversation is over, Elena. Rebecca will help. You pack your things. I walked out of his office in a daze. The hallway seemed impossibly long, each step echoing off the marble floors. Colleagues I'd worked alongside for years avoided eye contact. Word travels fast in corporate environments, and everyone already knew. Rebecca was waiting by my office, a cardboard box in her hands and tears in her eyes. I'm so sorry, Elena. I had no idea this was coming. Neither did I. That was the part that stung most. Not just the betrayal, but the complete blind side. No warning signs, no gradual shift in Marcus's attitude, no hint that my position was in jeopardy. As I packed my personal items, a photo of my parents, the crystal paperweight from my first successful deal, my Northwestern diploma, I tried to process what had just happened. Trevor was about to walk into that boardroom and present my work as his own. 18 months of strategic planning, financial modeling, and relationship building, all handed over to someone who probably couldn't spell synergy correctly. The elevator ride down felt eternal. Security guard James Morrison, who I'd chatted with every morning for 7 years, couldn't look at me as he escorted me through the lobby. Outside on LaSalle Street, I stood on the sidewalk holding my cardboard box, watching my former colleagues through the building's glass facade as they prepared for the most important meeting in company history, a meeting I would never attend. Took a cab to my Lincoln Park apartment, my mind spinning with questions that had no answers. Why now? Why Trevor? What had I done wrong? Was this really about the merger, or something else entirely? My apartment felt foreign after spending so little time there lately. Mail piled up on the kitchen counter, dishes in the sink, a layer of dust on everything. I'd been living at the office consumed by the Hartman deal, and now I had nothing to show for it. I poured myself a glass of wine even though it wasn't even noon and tried to think rationally. Maybe I could call Hartman directly, explain the situation, convince them that working with Trevor was a mistake. But that would be career suicide. Going around your former employer to sabotage a deal would blacklist me from every major corporation in Chicago. My phone buzzed with a text from my best friend Monica. Just heard what happened. Coming over. Now, the corporate world moves at light speed when it comes to gossip. Monica worked at a competing firm downtown, and she'd probably heard about my termination before I'd even left the building. She arrived 20 minutes later with Thai food and a bottle of vodka. Monica Patterson had been my roommate at Northwestern and my closest friend for over a decade. She was one of the few people who knew how much the Hartman deal meant to me, how many personal sacrifices I'd made to see it through. Okay, start from the beginning, she said, settling onto my couch. What the hell happened? I recounted the morning's events, from Marcus's strange demeanor to the abrupt termination. Monica listened without interrupting, her expression growing more incredulous with each detail. This doesn't make sense, she said finally. You were Wellington's star player. Everyone in the industry knows you're the one who built that deal. Why would Marcus torpedo his own merger by putting his incompetent nephew in charge? That was the question haunting me. Marcus was many things. Demanding. Perfectionist, sometimes ruthless. But he wasn't stupid. He knew Trevor couldn't handle a deal of this magnitude. So why risk everything? Maybe there's something you don't know, Monica suggested. Some external pressure, some family obligation forcing his hand. I'd considered that possibility. Marcus's sister Diana, Trevor's mother, was a significant shareholder in Wellington Industries. But she'd never interfered with business operations before, and Marcus had always maintained strict boundaries between family and corporate decisions. My phone rang. Sarah Chen's name appeared on the screen, the same Sarah Chen from Hartman Corporation. who had specifically requested to work with me. Elena? I just heard the most bizarre news. Someone from Wellington Industries called to inform us that you're no longer with the company and that Trevor Wellington will be our primary contact going forward. I closed my eyes. It's true, Sarah. I was terminated this morning. That's impossible. You're the architect of this entire merger. We specifically structured our deal around your strategic framework. What happened? I couldn't explain what I didn't understand myself. I wish I had answers. All I know is that Marcus made the decision to replace me with his nephew. There was a long pause. Elena, I need to be honest with you. Our board has serious concerns about this change. Trevor Wellington has been involved in some of our preliminary discussions, and frankly, we're not confident in his ability to execute a transaction of this scope. My heart sank. The deal I'd worked so hard to build was already falling apart. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. We're considering postponing the merger until we can better understand Wellington Industries' internal situation, Sarah continued. This kind of last-minute personnel change raises red flags about their organizational stability. After we hung up, I sat in stunned silence. Marcus hadn't just destroyed my career, he'd potentially destroyed the deal itself. Hartman Corporation was having second thoughts, and who could blame them? From their perspective, Wellington Industries had just fired their most competent dealmaker and replaced her with someone they'd already assessed as inadequate. Monica poured us both generous glasses of vodka. So what's your next move? I didn't have one. In the span of 4 hours, I'd gone from leading the biggest merger in Wellington Industries history to being unemployed and watching the deal collapse in real time. My phone was already buzzing, with calls from headhunters who'd heard the news, but starting over somewhere else felt impossible. I keep thinking there has to be more to this story, I said. Marcus isn't just throwing away $1.5 billion on a whim. There's something I'm missing. Monica raised her glass. Then let's figure out what it is. As evening approached, I found myself staring out my apartment window at the Chicago skyline, the same view I'd admired from Wellington Industries' Boardroom countless times. Somewhere in one of those gleaming towers, Trevor was probably preparing for tomorrow's follow-up meeting with Hartman, assuming there would be one. But Sarah Chen's call had planted a seed of hope. If Hartman was reconsidering the merger because of my termination, maybe the deal wasn't as lost as I'd thought. Maybe there was still a way to salvage everything I'd worked for. I just had to figure out what Marcus was really afraid of, and why Trevor, completely unqualified Trevor, was suddenly more important than a $1.5 billion merger. The answer, when it came, would change everything I thought I knew about Wellington Industries, about Marcus, and about my own place in this story. But that discovery was still hours away, hidden in documents I'd never seen and revelations that would shake the foundation of everything I believed. The next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. News of my termination had spread through Chicago's business community like wildfire. Former colleagues, competitors, and clients were all reaching out, some offering support, others fishing for inside information about Wellington Industries. Sudden change in strategy. I ignored most of them and focused on the one call that mattered. My lawyer. David Hendricks had handled my employment contracts for years. His downtown office on Wacker Drive overlooked the Chicago River, and he'd built a reputation for protecting executives in high-stakes corporate disputes. If anyone could help me understand my legal options, it was David. Elena, I've been expecting your call, he said when I arrived at his office. The whole city's talking about what happened yesterday. David spread my employment contract across his mahogany desk, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose as he examined the fine print. The good news is, Wellington Industries can't just terminate you without cause. Your contract explicitly states that any termination must be justified by documented performance issues or violations of company policy. Then Marcus violated my contract? Possibly. But here's where it gets complicated. David leaned back in his leather chair. If they can prove the termination was related to a legitimate business restructuring or strategic shift, they might have grounds. The question is whether replacing you with Trevor qualifies as a strategic decision or if it's simply nepotism. I thought about Marcus's behavior, his inability to look me in the eye, the guilt written across his face. It felt personal, David, like he was being forced into something he didn't want to do. That's interesting. Has there been any unusual activity at Wellington Industries lately? Changes in board composition, new investors, family pressure? Not that I know of. But then again, I was so focused on the Hartman deal that I might have missed something. David made notes on his legal pad. I'm going to need you to gather everything you can about Wellington Industries' recent corporate activities. Board meeting, minutes, financial reports, any communications between Marcus and other shareholders. If we're going to challenge this termination, we need to understand what really motivated it. As I left David's office, my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but something compelled me to answer. Elena Rodriguez? This is Janet Whitmore from the Chicago Business Journal. I'm writing a story about your departure from Wellington Industries and its potential impact on the Hartman merger. Would you be willing to comment? A journalist. Word really was spreading fast. I appreciate the call, Janet, but I'm not making any public statements at this time. I understand, but you should know that Trevor Wellington has scheduled a press conference for this afternoon. He's announcing his new role as lead negotiator for the Hartman deal. Don't you think your side of the story deserves to be heard? Trevor was calling a press conference? Marcus must be more desperate than I'd realized. You don't announce personnel changes to the media unless you're trying to control the narrative. What time is the press conference? 2 o'clock at Wellington Industries headquarters. Will you be there? I hung up without answering, but I knew I would be. Not inside the building. Security would never let me pass the lobby. But somewhere nearby. I needed to see how Trevor planned to spin this disaster. At 1:45 p.m., I positioned myself across the street from Wellington Industries, using the Starbucks on the ground floor of the adjacent building as my observation post. Through the coffee shop's windows, I had a clear view of the media gathering in Wellington's lobby. Local business reporters, financial journalists, even a crew from Channel 7 News. This wasn't just about announcing a personnel change. This was damage control on a massive scale. At exactly 2 o'clock, Trevor emerged from the elevator wearing a navy suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Even from across the street, I could see his confident stride, the way he commanded attention simply by existing in the space. He approached the makeshift podium with the kind of self-assurance that only comes from never having to earn your position. Born into wealth, educated at elite institutions, handed opportunities that others spent decades fighting for. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. I'm Trevor Wellington, and I'm excited to announce that I'll be leading Wellington Industries' strategic partnership with Hartman Corporation. Strategic partnership, not merger, not acquisition. Already, he was changing the language I'd carefully crafted over 18 months of negotiations. This represents a new chapter for Wellington Industries, one that combines our family's decades of experience in manufacturing with innovative approaches to industrial automation. Family's decades of experience. He was making this about legacy, about bloodline, about inherited right, rather than earned expertise. I want to assure our shareholders, our employees, and our partners at Hartman Corporation that this transition represents continuity, not disruption. Wellington Industries remains committed to the vision that has made us a leader in our industry. Continuity. The word made my stomach turn. There was nothing continuous about replacing the architect of your biggest deal with someone who'd never closed a transaction worth more than $50 million. A reporter raised her hand. Mr. Wellington, can you comment on the departure of Elena Rodriguez, who was previously leading the Hartman negotiations? Trevor's confident smile flickered for just a moment. Ms. Rodriguez made valuable contributions to our preliminary discussions with Hartman. We're grateful for her service and wish her well in her future endeavors. Preliminary discussions. 18 months of work reduced to preliminary discussions. However, Trevor continued, as we move forward with finalizing this partnership, it became clear that we needed leadership with deeper connections to Wellington Industries' core values and long-term strategic vision. Code 4, we needed someone with the right last name. Another reporter jumped in. There are reports that Hartman Corporation has expressed concerns about this leadership change. Can you address those rumors? Trevor's smile tightened. I spoke with Sarah Chen from Hartman's board this morning. They're fully supportive of the transition and excited to work with fresh perspectives on our combined future. I nearly choked on my coffee. Sarah Chen had told me yesterday that Hartman was considering postponing the merger. Either Trevor was lying or something had changed dramatically in the past 24 hours. After the press conference ended, I walked aimlessly through downtown Chicago, trying to process what I'd witnessed. Trevor's performance had been polished, professional, and completely divorced from reality. But the media would report his version of events, and public perception would shift accordingly. My phone buzzed with a text from Monica. Saw the press. Conference online. This is insane. Meet me at Murphy's at 6. Murphy's Pub was our usual spot for dealing with career disasters. Located in River North, it had the kind of dim lighting and strong drinks that made even the worst days bearable. Monica was already there when I arrived, nursing a whiskey and looking furious. I've been in corporate communications for 8 years, and I've never seen anything like that press conference. Trevor looked like he was announcing his engagement, not taking over a failing merger. What are you hearing from your contacts? Mixed signals. Some people think Marcus finally lost his mind. Others are wondering if there's more to this story than meets the eye. Monica leaned closer. But here's the interesting part. I called my friend Kelly at Hartman Corporation. She works in their legal department. And, according to Kelly, there was a conference call between Hartman's executives and Wellington Industries this morning. Not with Trevor, with Marcus directly. Whatever Marcus told them, it was enough to get them back on board. I stared at my drink, trying to piece together the puzzle. So Hartman's not pulling out of the merger? Apparently not. But Kelly said something strange. She overheard her boss talking about ownership complications and family dynamics that needed to be resolved before the deal could proceed. Ownership. Complications. The phrase sent a chill down my spine. What kind of ownership complications could possibly require my removal from the deal? Monica, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Always. In all our conversations about Wellington Industries, did I ever mention anything about stock options, equity stakes, or ownership positions? Monica thought for a moment. You mentioned stock options when you first got promoted to VP. Standard executive compensation package. Why? I'm not sure. Something about this whole situation feels wrong. Marcus isn't just protecting his nephew. He's protecting something else. Something valuable enough to risk a $1.5 billion merger. You think there's money involved? I think. There's something I don't know about my own employment with Wellington Industries. When I got home that night, I spread every document related to my employment across my dining room table. Contracts, performance reviews, compensation statements, benefit summaries. 7 years of paperwork that I'd never examined closely because I'd trusted Marcus to handle the details. Most of it was standard corporate documentation. But buried in my initial employment agreement was a clause I'd forgotten about. A provision that granted me equity participation in any major corporate transaction that I personally initiated or led. The language was complex, full of legal jargon, that I'd glossed over when I was 24 and desperate for the job. But now, reading it carefully, I realized what it meant. If I could prove that I had initiated or led the Hartman merger, I was entitled to a percentage of the transaction value. Not just a bonus or commission, actual equity ownership. I grabbed my phone and called David Hendricks, not caring that it was nearly midnight. David, I need you to look at something. There's a clause in my employment contract that I never fully understood. Elena, it's almost midnight. Can this wait until... No, it can't. This might explain everything. I read him the clause word for word, hearing him take notes on the other end of the line. This is very unusual language for an employment contract, he said finally. Most companies would never agree to terms like this. It essentially makes you a stakeholder in any deal you originate. Could this be why Marcus fired me? If the clause is enforceable, and if you can prove you initiated the Hartman merger, then yes. Firing you might be the only way to prevent you from claiming an ownership stake in the transaction. I felt the pieces clicking into place. David, I need you to calculate something for me. If I initiated the Hartman merger and the deal closes for $1.5 billion, what percentage would I be entitled to under this clause? The silence on the other end of the line stretched for what felt like an eternity. Elena, based on the language, in your contract, if you can prove you initiated and led this merger, you'd be entitled to approximately 40% of the equity value. 40% of $1.5 billion. $600 million. Marcus hadn't just fired me to give his nephew a job. He'd fired me to prevent me from claiming ownership of nearly half the company's value. But he'd made one critical mistake. He'd assumed I didn't know about the clause. David, I need you to meet me first thing tomorrow morning. We're going to challenge this termination, and we're going to claim my rightful ownership of the Hartman deal. Elena, are you sure about this? This kind of legal battle could drag on for years. Wellington Industries has deep pockets and excellent lawyers. I thought about Trevor's smug press conference, about Marcus's inability to look me in the eye, about 18 months of my life reduced to preliminary discussions. I'm sure. Marcus Wellington is about to learn that stealing $600 million from someone is significantly more difficult than he imagined. As I hung up the phone, I realized that tomorrow would bring a very different kind of merger, negotiation. Not between Wellington Industries and Hartman Corporation, but between me and the man who'd tried to steal my future. The war was just beginning. The next morning, I arrived at David's office with a briefcase full of documents and a determination that surprised even me. Overnight, something had shifted. The hurt and confusion were still there, but they'd been overshadowed by something else. Fury at being underestimated. David had pulled an all-nighter researching corporate equity law, and his usually pristine office looked like a legal war room. Case files scattered across every surface, yellow highlighter marks covering page after page of precedents and statutes. I've been thinking about your contract clause all night, he said without preamble. The language is ironclad. If we can prove you initiated the Hartman merger, Wellington Industries owes you 40% of the transaction value. What do we need to prove initiation? David consulted his notes. Documentation showing you first identified Hartman as a potential partner, evidence that you developed the strategic framework for the merger, records of your direct communications with Hartman executives, and proof that the deal wouldn't exist without your specific contributions. I opened my briefcase and began laying out materials I'd gathered from my home office. I have email chains dating back 19 months showing my initial outreach to Hartman Corporation. I have the original strategic analysis I wrote that convinced Marcus to pursue the merger. I have meeting notes from every negotiation session. This is excellent, but we need more. We need internal Wellington Industries documents that support your version of events. Board meeting minutes, internal memos, financial projections, anything that shows the company's recognition of your role. I don't have access to those anymore. David smiled grimly. But we can subpoena them. Once we file our legal challenge, Wellington Industries will be required to produce all relevant documents. That's when we'll see what Marcus has been hiding. While David prepared the legal paperwork, I drove to Northwestern University to meet with Professor Angela Martinez, who had taught my graduate course in corporate strategy. Angela had maintained connections throughout Chicago's business community, and I needed someone with inside knowledge of Wellington Industries' history. Angela's office in the Kellogg School of Management overlooked Lake Michigan, the same view I'd admired during my MBA program. She greeted me with the warm smile I remembered from classes, but her expression grew serious as I explained the situation. Elena, this is extraordinary. That equity clause in your contract, I've never seen language like that in a standard employment agreement. It's almost like Marcus wanted to create a partnership arrangement rather than traditional employment. Why would he do that? Angela pulled out a thick folder from her filing cabinet. I've been following Wellington Industries for years. They're privately held, family-controlled, but the ownership structure is more complex than most people realize. Spread several documents across her desk: corporate filings, industry reports, financial analyses spanning the past decade. Marcus Wellington owns 51% of the company, which gives him controlling interest. His sister Diana owns 24%. The remaining 25% is distributed among early investors and key employees through various equity arrangements. I studied the ownership breakdown. So Marcus has control, but not overwhelming dominance. Exactly. And here's where it gets interesting. Angela pointed to a footnote in one of the reports. 3 years ago, Diana Wellington threatened to sell her shares to a competitor. It would have destroyed Marcus's control and potentially triggered a hostile takeover. What stopped her? Marcus negotiated a family agreement that guaranteed Diana's son, Trevor, would eventually take a leadership role in the company. It was the only way to keep her shares in the family. The pieces were falling into place. So when I became indispensable to the Hartman merger, I became a threat to Trevor's inheritance. More than that, if your equity clause grants you 40% of the merger value, and if that translates to actual company ownership rather than just cash compensation, you could end up controlling more of Wellington Industries than Diana. I felt the blood drain from my face. 40% ownership would make me the largest individual shareholder, with effective veto power over major corporate decisions. Trevor wouldn't just lose his guaranteed leadership position. The entire family power structure would collapse. Angela, is there any way to determine if my equity clause grants ownership shares or just cash payments? She examined my contract carefully. The language is ambiguous, which means it could be interpreted either way. That ambiguity will be the focus of your legal battle. I left Northwestern with a much clearer understanding of the stakes involved. This wasn't just about money. It was about control of a billion-dollar corporation. Marcus hadn't fired me to protect his nephew's career. He'd fired me to protect his family's dynasty. But I still needed proof of Wellington Industries' internal recognition of my role in the Hartman merger. That proof existed somewhere in the company's files, and I had an idea of how to get it. Rebecca Martinez had been my assistant for 3 years. She was efficient, loyal, and had access to executive files that most employees never saw. More importantly, she'd been genuinely upset about my termination and might be willing to help. I couldn't contact her directly. Wellington Industries would be monitoring all communications with former employees. But Rebecca had a standing lunch appointment every Thursday at Corner Bakery on Michigan Avenue. It was 11:45 a.m. on Thursday. I arrived at Corner Bakery 15 minutes early and chose a table near the back, away from the lunch crowd. Rebecca appeared exactly on time, looking nervous but determined. Elena, I can't believe what they did to you. Everyone in the office is talking about it. What are they saying? Marcus lost his mind. That Trevor is going to destroy the Hartman deal. That the whole company might collapse without you. Rebecca leaned across the table. But there's something else. Something I overheard yesterday. What kind of something? Diana Wellington came to the office for an emergency board meeting. I was delivering documents to the conference room when I heard her arguing with Marcus. She was furious about the timing of your termination. This was unexpected. Diana was angry about me being fired? She kept saying, "You should have handled this months ago, and now she knows too much." Marcus kept trying to calm her down, but she was screaming about lawsuits and exposure. Diana Wellington knew about my equity clause. She'd probably known from the beginning and had been pressuring Marcus to eliminate me before the merger closed. "Rebecca, I need to ask you something, and I need you to understand that this could be dangerous for your job." She nodded. "I've been expecting this conversation. I need access to internal documents that prove my role in developing the Hartman merger. Board meeting minutes, internal memos, email communications between Marcus and Diana, anything that shows the company's recognition of my contributions." Rebecca was quiet for a long moment. "Those documents exist. I've seen them. Marcus has a private file cabinet in his office with all the sensitive Hartman materials. Can you get to them?" "Not easily, but there might be another way." Rebecca pulled out her phone and scrolled through her calendar. "Marcus is flying to New York tomorrow for meetings with Hartman's legal team. He'll be out of the office all day. His private files are locked, but I know where he keeps the backup key." "Rebecca, if they catch you, they already created a hostile work environment by firing you. Half the staff is looking for new jobs anyway. What's the worst they can do, fire me too?" We agreed to meet the following evening at Millennium Park. Rebecca would copy whatever documents she could find, and I would ensure she had legal protection if Wellington Industries discovered her involvement. The next 24 hours crawled by. I spent the time with David, refining our legal strategy and preparing for the document review. If Rebecca's intelligence was accurate, we'd soon have internal proof of Wellington Industries' recognition of my role in the Hartman merger. At 7 p.m., I met Rebecca at the Crown Fountain in Millennium Park. She looked exhausted but triumphant, carrying a manila envelope thick with documents. "I got everything," she said breathlessly. Board meeting minutes from the past 2 years, internal email chains between Marcus and Diana, financial projections showing your contribution to company value, even Marcus's personal notes about the equity clause in your contract. I opened the envelope and scanned the first few documents. What I saw made my hands shake. Internal memos explicitly crediting me with identifying Hartman Corporation as a strategic partner. Board meeting minutes describing the merger as Rodriguez's initiative, and discussing the significant equity implications of my employment contract. Email exchanges between Marcus and Diana debating whether to resolve the Rodriguez situation before the merger closed. But the most damning evidence was Marcus's handwritten note from 6 months ago. "ER is contract clause could grant her. Controlling interest post-merger. Family must discuss elimination strategies before Hartman signing." Elimination strategies. They'd been planning to fire me for months, waiting for the right moment to minimize legal exposure. "Rebecca, you've just given me everything I need to win this case?" "There's something else," she said quietly. "I found Marcus's private correspondence with Wellington Industries' board of directors. They've been discussing a secondary offer from Hartman Corporation." "What kind of secondary offer?" "Hartman is so concerned about the leadership change that they're considering reducing their purchase price from $1.5 billion to $1.2 billion. They see Trevor's appointment as a risk management issue." $300 million. Marcus's decision to fire me had already cost Wellington Industries $300 million, and the deal hadn't even closed yet. "When is the final signing scheduled?" "Monday morning at 10 a.m. But according to the emails I saw, Hartman's board is meeting Sunday night to vote on the reduced offer." I looked at the Chicago skyline, lights beginning to twinkle as evening settled over the city. Somewhere in one of those buildings, Marcus Wellington was probably celebrating what he thought was his victory over me. Trevor was probably preparing For his moment of triumph, finally stepping into the leadership role he'd always believed was his birthright. Neither of them realized that I now possessed documentation proving my ownership of 40% of their company. More importantly, neither of them knew that their actions had already begun destroying the very deal they'd fired me to protect. Rebecca, I need you to do one more thing for me. Name it. Tomorrow is Saturday. I want you to call in sick on Monday and not return to Wellington Industries until after the merger is resolved. Why? I smiled for the first time in days. Because on Monday morning, I'm going to walk into that signing ceremony and reclaim what's rightfully mine. And when I do, I don't want you anywhere near the explosion that follows. As Rebecca walked away into the Chicago night, I realized that the real merger was just beginning. Not between Wellington Industries and Hartman Corporation, but between the woman Marcus had tried to destroy and the power she was about to reclaim. Monday morning would change everything. Saturday morning arrived with an urgency that matched my heartbeat. David's office was buzzing with weekend activity as his legal team prepared for what he called the most audacious corporate takeover attempt in Chicago history. We have 48 hours to file an emergency injunction, David explained, spreading legal documents across his conference table. If we can prove that your termination was specifically designed to circumvent your equity rights, we can halt the Hartman merger until ownership questions are resolved. His associate counsel, Patricia Chen, looked up from her laptop. I've researched similar cases across 7 states. There's precedent for employee equity claims disrupting major corporate transactions, but nothing quite like this scope. What's our biggest vulnerability? I asked. David adjusted his glasses. The ambiguity in your contract language. Wellington Industries will argue that the equity clause grants you cash compensation, not actual ownership shares. If they succeed, you get a payout but no control over the company. And if we succeed, you become the largest individual shareholder of Wellington Industries, with effective veto power over the Hartman merger and any future corporate decisions. Patricia pulled up financial projections on her screen. Based on Wellington Industries' current valuation and the Hartman offer, 40% ownership would be worth approximately $600 million. But the real value is strategic control. While the legal team worked through Saturday, I had my own preparations to make. Monday morning's confrontation would require more than just legal documents. It would require perfect timing and unshakable confidence. I drove to my parents' house in Naperville, needing the clarity that only family conversations could provide. My father, Carlos Rodriguez, had built his own construction company from nothing, understanding better than anyone the complexities of business ownership and family dynamics. "Mija, you're playing a dangerous game," he said as we sat in his study, surrounded by architectural drawings and industry awards. "These wealthy families don't surrender power easily. Dad, they stole what was rightfully mine. The contract clause exists for a reason." My mother, Elena Rodriguez, brought us coffee and settled into her favorite armchair. "Tell me about this Marcus Wellington. What kind of man is he?" I described my 7-year relationship with Marcus, his mentorship, his recognition of my talents, his gradual transformation into someone I no longer recognized. "He sounds like a man caught between loyalty to family and respect for merit," my mother observed. "That's a painful position." "But he made his choice, Mom. He chose family over fairness. Perhaps. Or perhaps he was forced into a choice he never wanted to make." Her words stayed with me as I drove back to the city. Had Marcus been a willing participant in the conspiracy against me, or had Diana Wellington pressured him into protecting Trevor's inheritance? Sunday evening brought an unexpected call from Sarah Chen at Hartman Corporation. "Elena, I hope you don't mind me calling your personal number. I got it from our preliminary contact files." "Not at all, Sarah. What can I do for you?" "Our board meeting is starting in an hour, and I wanted you to know what we're discussing. Hartman Corporation is seriously considering withdrawing from the Wellington merger entirely. My heart stopped. Withdrawing completely? Trevor Wellington has been challenging to work with. His understanding of the strategic framework is superficial at best. Yesterday, he suggested modifications to the deal structure that would actually violate federal antitrust regulations. I closed my eyes. Trevor was destroying 18 months of careful negotiation through sheer incompetence. More concerning, Sarah continued, we've received reports about internal instability at Wellington Industries. Personnel changes this dramatic usually indicate deeper organizational problems. What would it take for Hartman to reconsider? There was a long pause. Honestly, we'd need assurance that the original architect of this merger was somehow involved in finalizing the transaction. Your strategic vision was what sold our board initially. After we hung up, I called David immediately. David, Hartman Corporation might withdraw from the merger entirely. They want me involved in finalizing the deal. That changes everything. If Hartman withdraws, Wellington Industries loses $1.5 billion, and your equity claim becomes significantly more complex. We need to accelerate our timeline. What do you mean? We're filing the emergency injunction tonight instead of waiting until Monday morning. If Hartman withdraws before we establish your ownership claim, Wellington Industries could argue that the merger failure eliminates your equity rights. Sunday night became a blur of legal filings, court documents, and strategic preparation. David's team worked until 3 a.m., ensuring that every detail of our emergency injunction was legally bulletproof. Monday morning, 7 a.m. I stood outside Wellington Industries headquarters wearing my best Navy suit, carrying a briefcase containing documents that would either restore my rightful place or destroy my career permanently. David met me at the building entrance, flanked by Patricia Chen and a court officer carrying official legal papers. Ready? David asked. I looked up at the 42 floors of glass and steel, where I'd spent the most important years of my career. Let's do this. Security in the lobby recognized me immediately. James Morrison, the guard who'd escorted me out 5 days earlier, stared in confusion as I approached his desk. Ms. Rodriguez, I'm sorry, but you're not authorized to. David stepped forward and handed James the court documents. Emergency injunction from the Federal District Court. Ms. Rodriguez has legal authority to attend this morning's merger signing as a shareholder representative. James read the papers twice, made a phone call, then reluctantly issued us visitor badges. 42nd floor, conference room A. The elevator ride felt eternal. Each floor brought memories. The 23rd floor where I'd first presented. The Hartman opportunity. The 35th floor where I'd spent countless nights perfecting financial models. The 42nd floor where my career had begun and ended. Conference room A was exactly as I remembered. Mahogany table, leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan. But the atmosphere was tense in a way I'd never experienced. Marcus Wellington sat at the head of the table, looking exhausted and older than his 58 years. Trevor occupied the chair that should have been mine, shuffling through presentation materials with obvious nervousness. Diana Wellington stood by the windows, her perfectly styled silver hair and designer suit projecting authority that matched her financial stake in the company. Representatives from Hartman Corporation filled the opposite side of the table. Sarah Chen, their CEO Michael Hartman, legal counsel and financial advisors. Their expressions ranged from confusion to barely concealed annoyance. The room fell silent as I entered. "Good morning, everyone," I said calmly. "I apologize for the interruption, but I have legal documents that require immediate attention before this merger can proceed." Marcus's face went white. "Elena, you can't be here. Security will—" David handed copies of the injunction to everyone present. Federal court order establishing Ms. Rodriguez's shareholder rights under her employment. Contract with Wellington Industries. This merger cannot proceed until ownership questions are resolved. Trevor stood up abruptly. "This is insane. She doesn't own anything. She's a former employee trying to disrupt our transaction." Michael Hartman examined the court documents carefully. What exactly are you claiming, Ms. Rodriguez? I'm claiming 40% ownership of Wellington Industries based on my initiation and development of this merger. My employment contract explicitly grants me equity participation in transactions I personally create. The room erupted. Diana Wellington's voice cut through the chaos. This is extortion, pure and simple. No, I replied, maintaining perfect composure. This is contract law. Sarah Chen looked across the table at Marcus. Mr. Wellington, were you aware of this equity clause when you terminated Ms. Rodriguez? Marcus couldn't meet her eyes. The contract language is subject to interpretation. That's not what your internal documents suggest, Patricia Chen said, producing the evidence Rebecca had gathered. Board meeting minutes from 6 months ago explicitly discuss Ms. Rodriguez's potential ownership stake and strategies for eliminating her before the merger closing. Diana Wellington's perfectly controlled facade cracked. You have no right to those documents. We have every right under legal discovery, David replied, including this handwritten note from Mr. Wellington describing Ms. Rodriguez's contract clause as granting controlling interest post-merger. Michael Hartman set down the papers and looked directly at me. Ms. Rodriguez, if your ownership claim is valid, what are your intentions regarding this merger? This was the moment everything had been building toward. The room was silent except for the hum of air conditioning and the distant sounds of Chicago, traffic 42 floors below. My intention is to complete the merger I spent 18 months creating, I said. But under the original terms of $1.5 billion with proper recognition of my role and with guaranteed involvement in all future strategic decisions. Trevor's face turned red. You can't just walk in here and take over. I'm not taking over anything, I interrupted. I'm reclaiming what was mine from the beginning. Marcus finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. Elena, you have to understand the position this puts the family in. I understand perfectly, Marcus. The same way you understood the position you put me in when you fired me 3 minutes before the most important moment of my career. Sarah Chen turned to Michael Hartman. We need to discuss this development privately before proceeding. Agreed, Michael said. We'll reconvene in 1 hour. As the Hartman team filed out of the conference room, I remained seated at the table that had once been my second home. Diana Wellington stared at me with undisguised hatred. Trevor looked like he might be sick. Marcus appeared broken, caught between the loyalty he owed his family and the respect he'd once had for me. But none of that mattered anymore. The game had changed completely, and for the first time in a week, I held all the cards. The real question was how I intended to play them. The hour that followed felt like the longest 60 minutes of my life. While Hartman Corporation deliberated, in a separate conference room, I found myself alone with the Wellington family for the first time since my termination. The tension was suffocating. Diana Wellington broke the silence first. You have no idea what you've just done, do you? I've reclaimed what's rightfully mine. You've destroyed a family legacy that took 3 generations to build. Her voice carried decades of privilege and entitlement. Wellington Industries has been family-controlled for 60 years. We don't hand over power to outsiders. I'm not an outsider. I've been part of this company for 7 years. I've generated more value for Wellington Industries than anyone in this room. Trevor finally found his voice. You think you can just walk in here and steal my inheritance? Your inheritance? I turned to face him directly. What exactly have you inherited, Trevor? The right to destroy billion-dollar deals through incompetence? The right to trade on your family name while contributing nothing of value? Marcus remained silent, staring out the windows at Lake Michigan. He looked like a man watching his world collapse in real time. Marcus, I said quietly, you taught me everything I know about strategic thinking. You know this merger only exists because of my work. You know I've earned the right to be here. He turned slowly, and for a moment, I saw the mentor who had believed in me, who had given me opportunities others wouldn't. Elena, you were like a daughter to me. But business is business. Family comes first. Then you should have told me about the equity clause from the beginning. You should have explained what it meant instead of letting me work for 7 years without understanding. My own contract. Diana stepped forward. That contract was Marcus's mistake. The language should never have been approved by our legal team. But it was approved. It's legally binding. And now you have to live with the consequences. The conference room door opened, and Michael Hartman entered with Sarah Chen and their legal team. Their expressions were unreadable, but I could sense the weight of their decision in the air. We've reached a conclusion, Michael announced. But first, we need absolute clarity. On the ownership situation, David stood up. Ms. Rodriguez's equity claim is supported by her employment contract, internal company documents, and clear evidence of her role in initiating this merger. Wellington Industries has acknowledged her contributions in writing. And what exactly does that mean in practical terms? Sarah asked. If the merger proceeds at the original $1.5 billion valuation, Ms. Rodriguez becomes the owner of 40% of Wellington Industries, making her the largest individual shareholder. Trevor's face went from red to purple. This is insane. You can't give away nearly half our company to the person who created the value you're trying to sell? I interrupted. To the person who spent 18 months building relationships with your acquisition partner? To the person whose strategic vision convinced Hartman Corporation to make this offer in the first place? Michael Hartman consulted. His notes. Ms. Rodriguez, our board has discussed your ownership claim extensively. We have serious concerns about proceeding with a merger when the target company's ownership structure is in dispute. My heart sank. After everything, was Hartman going to walk away? However, Michael continued, we also recognize that you were the architect of this transaction. Our due diligence confirmed that this merger exists because of your strategic analysis and relationship-building efforts. Sarah took over. Hartman Corporation is prepared to proceed with the merger under the following conditions. First, the ownership dispute must be resolved immediately through binding arbitration. Second, regardless of the ownership outcome, Ms. Rodriguez must be involved in finalizing the transaction and overseeing the integration process. Third, we're reducing our offer to $1.3 billion to account for the additional risk and complexity. $200 million. The family infighting had cost Wellington Industries another $200 million on top of the $300 million reduction I'd learned about earlier. Their attempt to steal my equity had resulted in a $500 million loss. Diana Wellington looked like she might faint. You can't reduce the offer because of internal personnel matters. We can and we are, Michael replied firmly. Management instability directly impacts company valuation. Your decision to terminate the deal's architect created uncertainty that our shareholders will not ignore. Marcus finally spoke up. What kind of binding arbitration are you proposing? David answered before Michael could respond. Federal arbitration with a panel of 3 corporate law judges. All parties present their evidence, and the arbitrators determine whether Ms. Rodriguez's contract grants her cash compensation or actual equity ownership. Timeline? Patricia Chen asked. 48 hours, Sarah said. We'll delay the merger closing until Wednesday morning. If the arbitration confirms Ms. Rodriguez's ownership claim, we proceed with her as a major shareholder. If not, we proceed with the current management structure but still require her involvement in the integration. It wasn't everything I wanted, but it was justice. After 7 years of building value for Wellington Industries, I would finally have my day in court. I accept those terms, I said. Diana Wellington's voice was ice cold. And if we refuse arbitration? Michael. Hartman's response was swift and final. Then, Hartman Corporation withdrew from the merger entirely. You'll be left with nothing but legal bills and family feuds. Marcus looked at his sister, then at his nephew, then back at me. The weight of 3 generations of family business rested on his decision. "We accept arbitration," he said quietly. The next 48 hours transformed into the most intense legal battle of my career. David assembled a team of corporate law specialists, financial analysts, and employment contract experts. We worked around the clock, preparing evidence that would prove my equity claim beyond any reasonable doubt. The arbitration took place in federal court downtown, presided over by 3 retired federal judges with decades of corporate law experience. The hearing room was smaller than I'd expected, but the stakes couldn't have been higher. Wellington Industries brought in Morrison, Fletcher and Associates, one of Chicago's most prestigious corporate law firms. Their lead attorney, Jonathan Fletcher, had a reputation for winning impossible cases through legal technicalities and procedural maneuvering. "Your Honors," Fletcher began, "this case represents an attempt to weaponize poorly drafted contract language against a family business. Ms. Rodriguez was a valued employee, but she was never intended to be a business partner or shareholder." David's opening statement was equally compelling. "Your Honors, Wellington Industries deliberately used ambiguous contract language to attract top talent while secretly planning to deny them their earned equity rights. Ms. Rodriguez spent 7 years creating value under the reasonable belief that her contributions would be rewarded with ownership participation." The evidence phase took most of Tuesday. We presented email chains, board meeting minutes, internal financial analyses, and testimony from colleagues who could verify my role in developing the Hartman merger. The most damaging evidence came from Marcus's own files, handwritten notes discussing the Rodriguez situation, and strategies for eliminating equity complications before the merger closing. Fletcher tried to argue that these notes referred to normal business planning, but the arbitrator's questions suggested they weren't buying it. Wellington Industries' defense focused on technical contract interpretation. They argued that the equity clause was standard language meant to provide bonus compensation, not actual ownership shares. Fletcher brought in expert witnesses who testified that such language typically refers to cash payments rather than stock grants. But our expert witnesses countered with examples of similar contracts that had been interpreted as granting actual equity. Professor Martinez testified about the unique nature of my employment agreement and the clear intent to create partnership-style compensation. The testimony that sealed our victory came from an unexpected source, Rebecca Martinez. David had subpoenaed her as a witness to verify the authenticity of the internal documents she'd provided. But once she was under oath, Rebecca revealed information that went far beyond document verification. "Ms. Martinez," David asked, "in your role as executive assistant, did you witness conversations about Ms. Rodriguez's contract?" "Yes, many times." "Can you describe one specific conversation?" Rebecca looked directly at Marcus. 6 months ago, Mrs. Diana Wellington came to the office specifically to discuss Ms. Rodriguez's equity rights. She told Mr. Wellington that they needed to get rid of her before the Hartman merger closed because her contract would make her too powerful to control. The courtroom was silent except for the court reporters typing. Did Mrs. Wellington use any other specific language? She said that Ms. Rodriguez's equity clause was Marcus's biggest mistake and that they couldn't let some employee end up controlling their family business. Fletcher objected vigorously, but the damage was done. Diana Wellington's own words, spoken in front of a witness, proved that the family understood my contract as granting actual ownership rights. Wednesday morning, the arbitrators delivered their verdict. After careful consideration of all evidence and testimony, the lead arbitrator announced, "We find that Ms. Rodriguez's employment contract unambiguously grants her equity ownership in transactions she personally initiates or leads. The internal communications from Wellington Industries demonstrate their recognition of this interpretation." I felt David's hand squeeze my shoulder as the words sank in. "Furthermore, we find that Ms. Rodriguez's termination was specifically designed to circumvent her contractual rights, which constitutes breach of contract and violation of federal employment law. The arbitrator looked directly at me. Ms. Rodriguez, you are hereby granted 40% ownership of Wellington Industries, effective immediately. You are also awarded damages for wrongful termination and legal costs. 40% ownership, $600 million in company value. But more than that, vindication after 7 years of building something that others had tried to steal. As we left the courthouse, reporters were waiting on the steps. News of the arbitration had leaked, and Chicago's business community was buzzing, with speculation about the implications. Ms. Rodriguez, one reporter called out, "What's your next move as Wellington Industries' largest shareholder?" I paused on the courthouse steps, looking back at the building where justice had finally been served. My next move is completing the merger I spent 18 months building. Hartman Corporation is getting the strategic partnership they wanted, and Wellington Industries is getting the leadership it deserves. But even as I spoke those words, I knew the real battle was just beginning. Owning 40% of a company is one thing. Actually controlling it when the remaining 60% belongs to people who hate you, that's an entirely different challenge. Thursday morning would bring the final merger signing, with me sitting at the table as Wellington Industries' largest individual shareholder. The company that had tried to discard me was now partially mine. Marcus Wellington was about to learn what it really meant to work with someone who couldn't be fired. Thursday morning arrived with Chicago's skyline bathed in golden sunlight, but the atmosphere inside Wellington Industries felt arctic. I walked into Conference Room A for the final merger signing as the company's largest individual shareholder, holding 40% ownership and effective veto power over every major decision. The dynamic had shifted completely. Marcus sat rigid in his chair, no longer the commanding CEO, but a man whose family empire had been forever altered. Diana Wellington refused to make eye contact, her usual composure replaced by barely controlled fury. Trevor looked lost, his guaranteed inheritance transformed into minority stakeholder status under my oversight. Michael Hartman and the Hartman Corporation team appeared relieved. After days of uncertainty, they finally had clarity about Wellington Industries' leadership structure and decision-making authority. "Before we proceed with signing," Michael announced, "I want to address the new governance structure. Ms. Rodriguez, as the largest shareholder, what are your expectations for Wellington Industries' future direction?" I'd spent the entire night preparing for this moment. My expectation is that Wellington Industries operates as a meritocracy rather than a family dynasty. Decisions will be based on strategic value and competitive advantage, not bloodlines or personal relationships. Trevor shifted uncomfortably. "What does that mean for existing management?" "It means everyone earns their position through performance, including you, Trevor." Diana Wellington couldn't contain herself any longer. "You're destroying everything. This family built over 60 years. I'm preserving what this family built by ensuring it's managed competently. The past week proved that nepotism was about to destroy Wellington Industries completely." Michael Hartman intervened diplomatically. "Let's focus on finalizing the merger terms. Under the arbitration ruling, how do we structure the transaction?" David consulted our legal documents. Wellington Industries maintains its current ownership structure, with Ms. Rodriguez holding 40% and the Wellington family retaining 60% distributed among various members. However, as the largest individual shareholder, Ms. Rodriguez has effective control over major strategic decisions. Sarah Chen reviewed the financial implications. At the final purchase price of $1.3 billion, Ms. Rodriguez's 40% stake is valued at $520 million, while the Wellington family's combined 60% is worth $780 million. The numbers were staggering, but they represented more than money. They represented a fundamental shift in corporate power from inherited privilege to earned achievement. Marcus finally spoke, his voice heavy with resignation. What guarantees do we have that you won't use your position to punish the family? Marcus, I'm not interested in punishment. I'm interested in building the company we always talked about during our strategy sessions. The difference is that now, I have the authority to ensure those conversations lead to actual implementation. The signing process took 2 hours, with lawyers from both sides reviewing every clause and signature. When Michael Hartman finally signed the last document, transforming Wellington Industries into a subsidiary of Hartman Corporation, I felt a complex mixture of triumph and melancholy. "Congratulations," Michael said, shaking hands with everyone around the table. "This merger represents the beginning of exciting possibilities for both organizations." As the Hartman team gathered their materials and prepared to leave, Sarah Chen approached me privately. "Elena, I have a proposal that might interest you. Hartman Corporation is expanding our strategic development division, and we're looking for someone to lead our next major acquisition. Interested?" 6 months ago, the offer would have been irresistible. But now, as owner of 40% of Wellington Industries and architect of its transformation, I had different priorities. "Thank you, Sarah, but I have work to finish here first." After the Hartman team departed, the Wellington family and I remained in the conference room, facing an uncertain future together. The silence stretched uncomfortably until Marcus stood up. "Elena, I owe you an apology. What we did to you was wrong, regardless of family considerations." "I appreciate that, Marcus. But I need you to understand something. This company represents 3 generations of family sacrifice and dedication. Diana and I watched our father build Wellington Industries from a small manufacturing shop into what it is today." Diana finally looked at me directly. "What Marcus is trying to say is that Wellington Industries isn't just a business to us. It's our legacy, our identity, our children's inheritance. I understand that. But legacy built on exclusion and entitlement isn't sustainable. If Wellington Industries is going to survive the next generation, it needs to embrace talent and merit over family connections." Trevor, who had been silent throughout the exchange, suddenly spoke up. "So what happens to me?" The question hung in the air. Trevor's future at Wellington Industries depended entirely on his willingness to prove himself through performance rather than inheritance. "That depends on you, Trevor. Show me you can contribute value to this company, and you'll have a place. Here, continue coasting on your family name, and you won't." "How am I supposed to prove myself when you control everything?" "The same way I did, through hard work, strategic thinking, and dedication to excellence. I'll give you the same opportunities Marcus gave me 7 years ago." Marcus looked surprised. "You're willing to mentor Trevor?" "I'm willing to give him a chance to earn his place, just like everyone else." Over the following months, Wellington Industries underwent the most significant transformation in its history. I implemented performance-based management systems, strategic planning processes, and professional development programs that elevated the entire organization. Trevor surprised everyone, including himself, by embracing the challenge. Without the guarantee of inherited leadership, he discovered motivation he'd never experienced before. He spent 6 months learning every aspect of the business, from manufacturing processes to financial analysis. Diana gradually accepted the new reality, recognizing that her family's 60% ownership was actually more valuable under competent leadership than it had been under the previous nepotistic system. Marcus adapted to sharing authority more easily than anyone expected. During one of our monthly strategy meetings, he admitted that working with me as a partner rather than an employee had rekindled his passion for the business. "You know, Elena, this arrangement might be better for everyone. I get to focus on long-term vision while you handle operational strategy. It's what we always talked about in those late-night planning sessions. We just never imagined it would happen like this." 6 months after the merger, Wellington Industries exceeded all performance projections. Our integration with Hartman Corporation had created synergies that benefited both organizations. and our strategic initiatives were generating value faster than anyone had anticipated. The transformation wasn't just financial, it was cultural. Wellington Industries evolved from a family business into a professional organization that happened to have significant family ownership. During our first annual shareholders meeting under the new structure, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this point. A week that began with betrayal and termination had ended with justice and transformation. A year ago, Wellington Industries was facing a choice between family loyalty and professional excellence, I told the assembled shareholders. Today, we've proven that the best companies embrace both. Marcus, now serving as chairman while I operated as chief strategy officer, nodded approvingly. Diana, who had been elected to the board of directors, managed the family's investment interests with newfound respect for professional management. Even Trevor had found his place, leading a new business development division where his relationship skills and family connections created genuine value. As the meeting concluded, I stood at the conference room windows overlooking Lake Michigan, the same view that had inspired so many strategic discussions over the years. The difference was that now those discussions led to implementation rather than frustration. Wellington Industries had become exactly what Marcus and I had envisioned during all those late-night strategy sessions, a company where merit determined, success and family legacy supported rather than constrained professional excellence. The boy who had tried to replace me had learned to earn his place. The family that had attempted to steal my equity had discovered that sharing power actually multiplied their wealth. The mentor who had betrayed me had rediscovered why he'd believed in me originally. Sometimes the best mergers aren't between companies, they're between competing visions of what success really means. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now, and hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.